Hello and welcome to Lois and Morgana Davidson Art. It's Lois here. I hope you're doing well and welcome back to my studio. Today I'll be showing you how I painted this stand of trees or copse on top of a hill. It's an autumn scene and the sky is quite blustery but still blue with lovely white clouds blowing up behind the hillside with the sunlight hitting the top of the hill and the lower parts of the hill in shadow. I was inspired by this photograph here that I found on Pixabay, and I shall leave a link to this in the description below. It reminds me of the rolling hills of the South Downs, very close to where I live, although I think this photograph is probably most likely from Austria, but it's still very similar to the stands of trees and copses and hanging woods that we have that look so striking on the South Downs. The first thing I'm going to do is draw it out roughly in pencil and then go over my pencil with waterproof fine liners. I use Faber-Castell Pitt pens for this because they're waterproof and they come in a variety of nibs, so you can get all sorts of different weights of line, and it makes it much easier for getting in your line work with a little bit of variety with some nice darks which you can see going in here for the main tree trunks. This is going to be a line and wash painting, so the waterproof ink will give me the structure, and then once the line work is finished, I can simply go in with the paint, add the mid-tones, a few darker tones, and leave the light tones to the white of the paper. You can see here that I've kept my drawing very simple, but I've put in my darkest tones with the fine liners. This will really help with the painting as that structure is already there. But hopefully you can also see that I have moved the trees over to the left because I feel that that gives us a much more balanced composition rather than the stand of trees being right in the middle as they were in the photograph. I'm using a piece of Milford cold pressed watercolour paper. It's taped to my board and my board is at an angle of about 20 degrees. I shall use the wet in wet method to start the painting off, and I'll begin with the sky. I'm using a large wash brush. Any large wash brush that you're comfortable with will do. I'm going to wet where the sky will be blue and leave the paper dry where I want my clouds. This will give me a variety of edges, soft and hard edges, softly diffused passages of paint where the paper is wet, but nice crisp edges where the paper is dry. And then I can sort of move between those two extremes of edges, softening back in places to give some nice variety and movement to the sky. I'm using cobalt blue and ultramarine blue with a touch of Payne's grey in places for the sky. The landscape itself will be painted with sap green, raw sienna, burnt sienna and Payne's grey. I'll continue working across the landscape, wet in wet, until I'm happy with the way this layer looks. What I'm trying to do is to get the sky in as quickly as possible, bringing some of the sky down behind the trees so it will show through the gaps in the trees, but leaving some of the trees white paper so I can get a nice, strong, clean orange there for my autumn foliage. The hill is painted with sap green mixed with a little bit of raw and burnt sienna just to make it a bit more earthy. And then I'm adding some Payne's grey into it to darken it slightly across the bottom of the hill to start off my cloud shadows. The downland hill that I'm trying to paint is chalk downland, so I'm going to scrape through the rich paint to reveal some of the white paper below. This should give me the indication of some little sheep paths crossing up the hill, maybe with the indication of a little bit of the chalk sort of showing through the grass here and there. But I shall sort of put a bit more of the darker colour around that so that those marks aren't too overt. They should soften back nicely, and I'll be painting more shadow over that at a later stage. Just before the painting completely dries, I'm going to use a size 14 round brush and drop in a little bit of this brighter colour into the foliage or the canopies of the trees. And just before this dries, I'm using the tip of my palette knife to scrape through a few lighter branches, not many, but just a few little highlights through the copse, and that should add to the variety of the end painting. Now I need to leave it all to dry completely, as that's the end of the wet on wet stage. I'll come back and finish it once it's dry. Here's the dry painting. It's lightened up a little as it's dried, although the colours are definitely stronger in real life because my studio lights aren't great, to be honest. I'm now going to use the wet on dry technique to add some detail and some darker tonal values. These will add shadows to the canopies and just bring out a little bit more detail for the finished painting. I'm using a small calligraphy brush, but any small round brush with a good point will do for this, and just dance the brush around the darker areas, creating these sort of calligraphic brush strokes that give us this sort of foliage texture. I hope you can see that by using this sort of darker desaturated green that's got a bit more Payne's grey in it and a touch of cobalt blue, that I'm darkening up and adding dimension to the shadowed areas here. And we're seeing the copse as sort of a density or thickness of trees. I can now bring in some brighter, richer burnt sienna, a little bit of raw sienna to brighten up the golden areas a little more and give them a bit more definition. The last thing to do is to darken up the cloud shadows across the base of the hill with my green mixture, sap green, Payne's grey, a bit of cobalt blue and a bit of raw and burnt sienna in it. But it's a nice dark colour with plenty of Payne's grey, and I'm using my 1.5 inch flat mottler wash brush to glaze over the hill nice and quickly and keeping it nice and rich, and just making sure I go over some of the paths and things like that to get these cloud shadows in, leaving a few sort of gaps here and there to give the impression of the ragged shape of the clouds crossing the hillside. This in turn makes the sunlit top of the hill stand out even more, and as well as enhancing the shadows underneath the foliage of the copse. And that's the painting finished, so I'm now going to leave it to dry completely. And here's the dry painting, and I'm really pleased with the way it looks and quite excited to remove the tape. If I remove the masking tape, it reveals that clean white border, which allows us to see it with fresh eyes and see it almost as if it was in a frame and a mount or mat. When I peel away the masking tape, I'm being careful to sort of pull it away from the painting so that if it was to tear, it wouldn't tear the painting. So here's the finished painting in a better light. And I think the line and wash technique has worked well here, just with the line work mostly in the trees. I haven't got any fine liner across the hill. I've used watercolour just to suggest the shadows and the sunlit top of the hill. But there's quite a lot of texture and tone was given to the painting straight away from the line work. And that's what makes the line and wash technique such a great one for beginners, because you can get your drawing right first and then ink it over with waterproof fine liners, and the structure of your painting is there ready for you. And then it's a great way to practice your wet in wet washes and then your wet on dry details on top of a structure like this. So I hope that was helpful. If you enjoyed the video, then please leave us a like, and why not subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. It's free to do, and if you click on the bell icon, you'll be notified whenever we release new videos, which is most days at the moment. If you're interested in supporting the channel, we have Patreon pages, both Morgana and myself, and the links are in the description below, and follow those if you'd like to support us there. And thank you so much to everybody that's supporting us there already. We really do appreciate you. So I'll see you again soon. Take care and have a great week.